Okay, good evening, and be very welcome, everyone, to our Women and Gender Studies Intersections panel discussion in connection with the Halsey Institute's Dyani White Hawk Hear Her exhibition, currently on display in the Halsey galleries. My name is Mark Long, and I'm a faculty member in the Political Science Department, and I also serve as the academic liaison at the Halsey. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you and to thank our panelists for their participation this evening. Particular thanks to Women in Gender Studies Program Director, Dr. Krista Weld, for Trojan work to put together one of the more striking panels that will take place anywhere on campus this spring. Notably, this evening's discussion includes voices of women from the Edisto Natchez-Kusso Tribe, the Pine Hill Indian Tribe, the Wassamasaw Tribe, and the Catawba Nation, along with faculty in political science and religious studies, and Dr. Weld will be introducing our speakers shortly. First, allow me to invite you to visit the Halsey over the remaining days of Dyani White Hawk's exhibition, which closes next weekend on Saturday, February 26th. If you've not visited, then please plan to do so to encounter her startling bodies of work that center North American Indigenous women and their cultures. In particular, we are excited to show one of the artist's first forays into native languages east of the Mississippi through a video that the Halsey commissioned on the Catawba Nation's lands. It is remarkable work, and if you need more incentive, then know that since Hear Her opened, Dyani White Hawk was included in this year's Whitney Biennial. The Halsey galleries are open Monday through Saturday from 11 to 4, and Thursdays we stay open until 7 p.m. And I'm very happy also to tell you that Hear Her will have a closing reception on Friday, February 25th from 5 to 7 p.m. when the artist will be visiting, and I would like to invite you to join us then. Do note that given concerns over the ongoing COVID pandemic, the number of people allowed in the galleries together is limited. So please see our website for a contact tracing form if you can attend then. Finally, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors. Dyani White Hawk Hear Her is sponsored in part by South Carolina Humanities, a not-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. The exhibition is also supported by the Center for Sustainable Development at the College of Charleston, which provides students with the opportunities and resources to engage in our community sustainably. And so let me turn things over to Dr. Krista Weld, Director of Women in Gender Studies and Master of Ceremonies for this evening's event.
Thank you so much, Mark. Welcome all. I am Krista Weld, Director and Professor of Women's and Gender Studies at the College of Charleston. And it is an absolute joy and such a privilege to be sharing virtual space with you all this afternoon. And while we may be dispersed, gathering virtually to keep ourselves, our families, our communities safe while this pandemic continues to rampage, we are united in spirit, and it's almost palpable. Regardless of where we are, where we physically may be situated in this moment, it is important to acknowledge, particularly in the context of our conversation today, that the vast majority of us are on ancestral lands that were stolen after contact and continue to be taken, pillaged, and denied through neo-colonial practices. Those of us affiliated with the College of Charleston perform our work on land once occupied and subsisted on by the Edisto people before they were forced out through the creation of what we know today as Charleston. And I'm grateful to my colleague Annette Watson for support with that language. And those of us at the college also work in and move through buildings and spaces that were built and inhabited by enslaved people, adding layers of theft to the histories all around us. We recall these ancestors and forebears to honor them and their legacies, to invite them into this space where we are gathered in community with each other. These are brief and yet essential acknowledgements that contribute to recentering the complex histories of enslavement and resistance, of genocide and survival, while simultaneously supporting current efforts for fuller truths, self-determination, and sovereignty, some of which we will hear about over the next hour or so. I want to reiterate what a privilege it is to host this conversation in partnership with the Halsey Institute for Contemporary Art. This is the second WGS Intersections at the Halsey event. And the framing of intersections is really rooted in women's and gender studies positioning as an academic discipline at the intersections of many other disciplines. We are an interdisciplinary field of study, informed by and informing academic areas ranging from classics and history to biology and public health. Women's and gender studies also explores the intersections of identities and how our varying positionalities shape and are shaped by our lived experience. And we interrogate power, redistributing it wherever we can. Dyani White Hawk's work is expansive and multimodal. Here at the Halsey, and central to our conversations this afternoon, is the installation titled Hear Her, as in hear her. In this work, Dyani centers women, language, connection to land, culture, and identity. Through the photo installation titled I Am Your Relative, which challenges stereotypes, fetishization, and the dehumanization of Native women, to the video installation Listen, White Hawk invites us to pause, to reflect, to listen, and to join her in celebrating what's possible when we hear her. I invite you to join us in listening and in hearing from this phenomenal panel of women who will address many of these themes through a semi-structured conversation that we will help to facilitate. We will flow through organic dialogue and with a few intentional questions peppered throughout. And then we will leave space towards the end of the event for your questions and comments, which you can enter into the chat and will be conveyed to us. So I welcome you again into this dialogue to hear from these women gathered with us today and be inspired. They are wise and they are generous. They're funny and they are powerful women, and we are humbled to host them in this conversation with Dyani White Hawk's work. So I will invite our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we will share with you a brief trailer of the installation Listen to orient everyone to a portion of the installation, and then we will enter into our conversation. So I am just going to go in the order of my screen, and I will ask Chief Mitchum, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Chief Michelle Mitchum of the Pine Hill Indian Tribe. I am also the Executive Director of the Pine Hill Indian Community Development Initiative and the Director of the Pine Hill Health Network. I'm an ambassador for the Community Health Workers Association at the University of South Carolina, Center for Health Alignment. I kind of have my hand in a lot of different things, so it's really kind of hard to narrow down. My background is in law. I'm a retired paralegal. I have a master's degree in law and forensic psychology, and went on into the health field to started out with phlebotomy, ended up doing clinical medical and rural health.
Wow, thank you so much. Next on my screen is Lisa Collins.
Hello, my name is Lisa Collins. I am Tribal Administrator of the recognized tribe of the Wassamasaw Tribe of Barntown Indians. We're located in Berkeley County, in between the towns of Monk's Corner, Goose Creek, Somerville, if anyone's familiar with the area. Just working for our community and with the state to try and bring resources and preserve our culture and our identity, and just happy to be here today.
Thank you, Lisa. Next on my screen is Becky Garris.
Nitintanaki, hello to all. Well, I guess I better get it off mute. I'm sorry. There you go.
The joys of Zoom. Becky, we'll give you just a break to get
thank you. There you go.
There we go.
I think the spirits are the little Yingsasoris are after me this afternoon. That's our little wild Indians. They are tricksters. So, but yeah, let me start over. Okay. I'm Becky Garris. I'm a former TIPO coordinator with the Catawba Indian Nation. I work part-time now with the University of South Carolina, Lancaster's Regional Native American Studies Center. I'm a potter, a basket maker, recently started making longleaf pine needle baskets and earrings. And I'm brain dead. I'm sorry. I just went to the 4th funeral in the last 15 days. So we buried the last one this afternoon. So, and she was my aunt. So if I pause and I'm kind of out there, it's because of what all's been going on. But I am so thoroughly blessed to be a part of this group. So, and I will see you next week or this week.
Thank you so much, Becky. And I know that I speak for all of us that we are sending you light and fortitude during this challenging time. And the fact that you hung in there and are still with us here in this panel is just a testament to your generosity. It really, really is. Next on my screen is Dana Mukelvani.
Hi, my name is Dana Mukelvani, and I am a member of the Edisto Natchez-Kusso Tribe. We are located in Ridgeville, and the other half of our tribe is located in Cottageville. I'm also a council member here. I've only been on for about a year, and I'm working with the other council members to continue to make others aware that we are still here and that we've never left, and then continuing to work with our elders and getting things that they need.
Thank you so much, Dana. And I hope to have an opportunity to hear more about all of that. My colleague Annette, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. It's a privilege for me to take part in this collaborative talking circle. I'm a professor of geography and environmental studies, and I teach classes on Indigenous politics and Indigenous ties to the land, particularly from the perspective of the colonizer and how colonizing communities need to come to reckon with those histories. And so I see my role as a professor is to ensure that our non-Indigenous students know the colonial injustices that my own ancestors perpetuated across Native lands. And I try and point out the ways that our shared nation can today learn from Indigenous approaches to land management for sustainable futures. And so I'm very much looking forward to learning more from these women that we've invited here today.
Thank you so much. And I'm also my colleague, Brennan.
Yes, I'm sorry, my camera, I can't seem to get to work. I'm having some internet issues in my office, but I'm Brenna Keegan, and I teach in the Religious Studies department at the College of Charleston. I predominantly teach courses on religion in the Americas, and with a focus on Native American traditions and traditional ecological knowledge. I've had the honor and privilege to work with Native communities predominantly out west, including the Northern Arapaho and the Utah Dene in Utah and Wyoming. And just over the last 2 years of having moved recently here to Charleston, starting to get to know the wonderful people that are part of the Edisto Natchez-Kusso community. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Brennan. Okay, everyone, we are going to show you a brief 2-minute trailer of Dyani that features Dyani White Hawk's installation, Listen, and we encourage you to listen.
Wag kibwa ma neo mikizi wag be maseg ma meswe ma gibi sha going gibi sha si
Kia ya kutsan kutsquer kaem kutsan kutsquer katamom matakanave mvavak Yats kuts konyedik nyavi anyevaik nyavi kumank
Yutki Bonkui Menta Naku Pimenta Ituma Kimta Luling Iwa Bonta Kin Wazokina Hinikaragi Hahamanuinga Hingaire Hunchi Kakara Jiwaonank He anchara ha hemaninga hingaire he unihara chalk shopping ya makam kikara Juliaman Bashishilan Yawis Quipum Loyasla Opim Ryokan Samam Pokuyukum Kramashaga Ars Yaja Shitlan Short Company Sonnet
Kneel down from what he got. Dale ho, di so, ni wat kwenos, ni wage ho, dale ho.
Dona teach up hina yushki at inaku yushki chichek hina you have big day hina iwachi bo doksta akewachi akekte imitakuas.
Okay. So that gives viewers and those who have not had an opportunity to engage with the exhibition a preview of some of what is there. And it is not a technical glitch that there are no subtitles. That is a very intentional decision made by the artist to encourage us to really listen and think and reflect on what it is that we are hearing. And I hope at some point in our conversation, Becky can speak to this particular piece of the installation because she is actually in it, representing the Catawba Nation, recorded speaking. So I will ask the first question, which may in fact be the only question that gets asked, given the really fun conversation that we all had, very generative and wonderful conversation that we had in planning this event. But I wanted to ask specifically about the artist and her work. Dyani White Hawk centers women in the works on exhibit at the Halsey. Why is this important in the context of understanding the role of language and culture for First Nations people historically and today?
Yes, I can start.
Please do.
In our community, the women are our wisdom keepers, the ones that pass along our history and our traditions. Our elders maintain a high rank of honor in our society. We're very matriarchal. So therefore, the women have a large role in leadership and being keepers of our culture and our traditions. So I understand why the use of the woman or the female figure in this installation is very effective because we relate to that, especially in our community, and we have common ground with the Native woman sharing the oral history. We lack in our community the language at this point, which connects us to who we are and our identity. So it's with great sadness that we're lost that part of our community. but it is wonderful to hear other people of communities still speaking their language, sharing their language, passing their language, teaching it, preserving it, because for a long time it was suppressed. And for a long time, there was no preservation or movement except by Indigenous people, and until the law was passed, I do believe in 1990, to preserve the native languages at that time. So we are really connected and relatable to the female as the icon of the exhibit.
You want to go in the order that we introduce ourselves, so that would Michelle will be next?
I can try to go next. Why is it important? Why is this important in the context of understanding the role of language and culture of First Nations and tribes? We're reflecting on the video, correct? But the one thing that stood out to me is that there was so much peace captured in that couple of minutes of video. That's something that we lost. What was captured in the video is what we have lost. And you can see that in cities, it's lost. It's all built up with buildings, and the evidence of Native America is gone. The role of language and culture for First Nations, the reason that is important to understand is because all of it was built off of our backs and off the backs of slaves. Everything we enjoy today is because of the first people that were encountered by the Barbadians and the Europeans. I think in reflecting on the video, I love that they captured how peaceful Turtle Island is, and you don't see that on a daily, regular basis. You actually go seek it out, and so that's one of the things that stood out to me from the video.
As far as the video, it's very moving, with Southeastern tribes being the first that were correctly invaded by Europeans. We were the buffer for all the other tribes that were able to save their language, because they were isolated 500 years longer than we were. And then all the rules that were passed and law, it made it illegal for us to speak our languages, to practice our ceremonies, religious ceremonies, or to even sing our songs. Whenever you hear, especially if you go to the powwows, you hear a lot of sounds. And it's because they are stretching out the vowels to the tune of some of their words, so that people who could understand knew what they were trying to say through the drumming, even though at one point the drumming and the dancing were illegal as well. So it was done in secret. And we are penalized because of a lot of the things that were lost through no fault of our own. So it's important that we all come together and stop. And this is so dear to my heart, that we have to stop comparing about who's who. Can you prove who you are? We all know who we are. And it's because of all the regulations and different things that we can't prove who we are because there are no written records. And even some of the written records that were there at one point have been destroyed. And that's one thing that Europeans and colonizers, and even today the federal government, they pit us against each other about, well, you're not state recognized, so, or you're not federally recognized. Well, federal recognition is not what it's all cracked up to be. We have a whole lot more rules and regulations that we have to follow than the average person has to follow. And it's always been the women who have held everything together. Whether it was out in the open or secretly, they were the history teachers that passed it down. And so our elders are our libraries. So we need to honor and respect them as much as we can. Because like I say, I just lost 3 of our libraries in the last 12 days. So I know what it is to lose a library. So thank you.
And Becky, it's worth noting for participants who are joining us from not only from Charleston, that you're here from the Catawba Nation, which is a federally recognized tribe, and that's different than the other First Nations and tribes that are represented here as well. And so hearing you all talk about those differences, it has been really interesting. I do wonder too, Lisa said that that you lack collectively, you lack the language and its connection to identity. And I was wondering if you might be able to say a little bit about your work with the language keepers for the Catawba Nation and the centrality of that and the importance of that.
Well, I was lucky enough and blessed enough that my great-grandfather, Chief Samuel Taylor Blue, his sister and his wife and his mother were the last fluent speakers of our language, but we had people who came in because we were the last dying Indians. So they wanted to study us, to write down. And until 1999, we didn't even have a written language. So that was one of the first things that we wanted to do, is to create our own written language. And we've had our dictionary since then. But while I was taking a sabbatical in Florida, I found some papers that the late Gilbert Blue, who was a cousin and also the grandson of Chief Blue, there were 75 pages of words and phrases in Catawba, but it was written phonetically. And our dictionary was not. We had it, if you knew the alphabet, you could read it and pronounce the words. But for the average layman, they would look at it and it'd be like me trying to read Latin, you know, because. So I started working on putting the phonetics in over the 500 pages of words and phrases that we do have on my own. And then I come back and I got connected back with the Culture Center on the reservation, and they were just beginning to start a committee to do this. And so by what I was doing on my own, we're kind of ahead of the game now because we're sharing all of the information. And at some point we want it to be where it's not only that you can read it, but you can hear it, how it's said. You can read a book or speak a language or read a language, but unless you know how it sounds, it's still, you're almost like you're creating your own words by the sound of it. So we need to where it will be spoken correctly, not just Joe Blow putting something on the internet and saying, okay, well, this is a word that I just invented in Catawba. So we wanted to have it uniform to where everybody will be on the same page.
Thanks, Becky. And I wanted to make sure, Dana, that you had space to also respond to the question about the centrality of women in language and culture.
Well, like the other ladies had stated so eloquently, the women in our tribe are the teachers, because they're mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts, and that's just how they're made. What I found moving about the is just how beautiful it sounds. I preferred it without the subtitles. It was more moving for me. And like the young lady from the Wassamasaw Tribe, our language, we have a language. We have our ex-chief is the only one who speaks it, and he's our teacher. We're trying to make sure that it doesn't disappear. Unfortunately, you know, with technology and internet, that the children aren't necessarily interested in, you know, what it means to hold on to it. So for me, like I said, I think that the women, the way she brought it out with the women and talking, it was poignant because the women are definitely, whether you're an indigenous woman, a person or not, women are always the backbone of your society.
Well, I don't think there'll be any objection on this call about that. So I wonder, Annette, did you want to move to the next question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that would be, I think it's a good place for it too. One of the things that I find so important to talk about with especially our non-native students are the variety of assimilation efforts that took place in the United States by the US government, you know, all in the effort to control your territory and your lands. And one of these assimilation efforts was something called the Dawes Act of 1887, and that refused to recognize any communal tribal land, making each individual Indian an owner of an allotment, which, you know, was a very foreign way of thinking about land, just as one example. And certainly other efforts involved educating students. And as Lisa Collins had noted, it wasn't until 1990 that Congress had even allowed native languages to be spoken in school. And so turning that around, though, my question is, how have your communities developed certain initiatives to either reclaim your languages or otherwise reclaim some of the things that you've talked about just now being lost? And what are some of those efforts that your communities are undergoing and engaging with that you've just started to talk about, but I'd love to hear more from you about those efforts to combat assimilation.
Well, I guess I'll go first again since I'm the elder of the group. We have, because children are so indoctrinated with the iPads or the iPhones or anything else, we have developed some games that are in Catawba and some words that are posted, and you can go on the Catawba Language website and you can find those. And we're also in the process of getting a alphabet in the, so that people can type it without having to do a search for a certain particular letter, because in our language we have no F's, L's, O's, Z's, or X's, but we have 4 sounds for each of our 4 vowels. So and it has to do with how it's written as to which one you would use for that particular sound. Like an A would be an ah, on, or ang. So unless you knew what the letter represented, you wouldn't know how to say a particular word. So they're trying to get a keyboard created so that you don't have to do all the, go up to the top and do a search or insert a particular letter. And we're teaching our Head Start kids songs and counting and animals, because they're mostly interested in more of saying the animal sounds than anything, because our animals were named 3 different ways. It was a descriptive, how they sounded, or what they did. Just like a chipmunk is a dippin' dot dot sook sook. And that's the one whose back is stripes or pretty. Is a goose, automatically because of the sound. And then the dabawang, which is a rabbit, and that's the one who hops.
And I think it's very valuable that Becky was able to find that resource and start working on our, bringing that language back. And that you mentioned the Dawes Act. In South Carolina, it goes even further back than that. In 1740 was the Negro Act, and any people of color became chattel. So imagine you're in a room full of furniture right now, expecting answers from us. We weren't even allowed to be human beings. The work that from the state recognized level, the work that we're doing is decolonizing data. We think that's a very important aspect, is decolonizing the data. There is very little Native American data in South Carolina, and that would include any data that would include the Catawba. Really the only reliable data that we can reflect on is from voters registration and Department of Education. But that too is skewed, because I know from my personal experience registering to vote, they did not want me to put Native American, and in fact registered me as Black, and I had to go back and they registered me as white. They wanted me to be anything but Native American. My marriage license, which was issued, gosh, we've been married 10 years. I am listed as other in 2011. I'm listed as other because I cannot put that I'm Native American on a marriage license in South Carolina. So reclaiming data is very important. Reclaiming language is important, but reclaiming data, decolonizing the data. We should not be victims of the manifest destiny or the cultural the critical race theory. We're not victims of that. We're working towards going in a direction where we not only reclaim our culture and heritage, but we do that in present sense. We're here. We want to be identified as what we are. The history of South Carolina, there's a lot of paper genocide that has occurred. There's a lot of legal genocide that has occurred, and we're working to reverse all of that through our efforts.
You know, you were talking about you got married 11 years ago. Up until 1960, it was still on the books in South Carolina that it was illegal to marry an Indian.
It was.
Yeah.
It sure was.
Yeah, and even at my age, whenever I was born, you didn't have a race or ethnic group to put down there. You put down color, so you either Black or white. There was no identifying your Native culture, who you were.
And interestingly enough, following back what Becky's talking about, interestingly enough, is even through the civil rights movement, and even through Supreme Court cases where you could marry a white person, could marry a black person, but you still couldn't marry an Indian. We couldn't even openly practice our religion until the late 1970s. I think it was 78. And that's at the federal level. I don't know that that's changed in South Carolina. I think it's still legal to take your wife down to the square and beat her at 4 o'clock on Sunday in Orangeburg. But there's a lot to be done in the law and the code.
For our community, we have an extra layer of uniqueness because the Varntown Indians was a assimilation of settlement Indians who gathered together for protection against other hostile peoples. And we were on the trading path, Cherokee trading path. So we had a lot of Native people settling in as well. And of course, we have the Etowah as well that was moved and relocated in the area. So when you talk about language, we have a simulation of different Native people in one area. So language is a big thing because how do we communicate? So we became very distinctive in our community of how we sound. I know, Dana, going to Ridgeville, if I'm not in Ridgeville and I meet someone that's from Ridgeville and they talk, I know that's someone from Ridgeville. I said, hold up. All right, you must be Edisto Natchez-Kusso. Or if I go to Holly Hill or I meet someone that speaks and that dialect is there, I know I am speaking to someone that's pretty much from the Santee Indian tribe in Holly Hill. So we have become very distinctive in our communities by how we sound with even just the English language. Can you imagine we sounded back at first colonial contact when we have gathered? So the loss of our language really hurt us after the assimilation into dominant society. And that's because as long as we stayed in our communities and we had our own churches and our own schools and our own businesses, we pretty much stayed isolated, and we maintained our traditions and our practices. But once we assimilated in our school, especially with the school system and desegregation, and we moved into dominant school systems, we lost our identity in a way. And it was very hard to assimilate because we didn't do things like everybody else, and we did not know how to behave in these different situations. So that's why education is such a big deal in our community, because we had a hard time adapting, and a lot of people did not complete their educations in the community because they would not go to a school where they didn't identify and no one identified with them. So assimilation has hurt our community because it has kind of given us that disability to interact and be competitive in today's society. So assimilation, it was good to assimilate with our brother Native people and our kinship tribes. But when we desegregated, we did lose a lot of our identity. And because we were kind of told that there was no place for us, really. There was no place for us to be distinct. And so our children growing up where no one looks like them, no one knows who they are, there's no history that's taught about us in the school system. You know, we're almost erased. So we've lost that identity. So when you were talking about the Dawes Act and about individual land ownership, we are seeing that more today because of development, because our land that is been in our tribal communities with family members for many, many years. Of course, you know, we don't have the opportunity to have deeds transferred or legal wills. It was just passed down from family word of mouth. So we, like we're saying, there's paper trails that are lost, things like we are on this land because my great-great-grandfather had this land and we've always lived here. So we have issues where we're tracing our land and it's just always been in the family, but there's no formal legal connection sometimes. So what does that leave us? It's heir land. And so when people pass away, it's hard to capture heir land and then it's sold or it's reclaimed by others, and we're losing due to development and zoning issues, especially with development in the area. So I do believe the Dawes Act was a way to continue to steal the land from the Native people and from the communities itself. So we were always connected to the land. No matter where we go, we always come back home and we always reconnect. And that's disappearing at a fast rate in our communities now.
I want to apologize before I start because it's raining out here and the internet service is terrible when it starts to rain. For us here at the Edisto, some of the things that we've lost, as I said earlier, is our language. It's not totally gone, but it's hanging by a thread. We're trying to, we hold classes, a lot of adults, some children sprinkled in there to pick it up. Like I said, our last chief, Andy Spell, is the only one who speaks it. We do have a dictionary that I'm anyone who wants it. The goal is for us, Sabrina and I, to become teachers ourselves. So for now, we're the student. Lots of things we were known for making, as well, I'm sure as others, making canoes. Our last elder, who actually was able to build one, taught a group of boys who are now men. And of course, no one's chopping down trees and building canoes. So now we just make paddles and we use them as gifts when we visit, per se, the Catawba. We would give them with a paddle. Basketry, it's a lost art. We're trying to get teachers to give us the fundamentals. I've started learning to do pine straw baskets, collecting the pine straw myself, cleaning it, possibly dyeing it. I've got a spare room that looks like a hot mess. Anybody wants to come help? We're also trying to bring back pottery. Sabrina and I have a long list of things that we want to do, but we're just two girls. And we're going to do it. It's just going to take some time. I think with assimilation, you know, we wanted to be ourselves, and the only way we could do that was to be among ourselves. And then, unfortunately, though, as we're going to use the word colonizers came in, they and kind of moved around us. When we had to go into town, of course, obviously we had to try not to be ourselves because we were so different compared to them. We didn't want any attention. And a lot of times, and I'm sure the other tribes have groups or members that are just like, they don't want to put the Indian on their application, or they don't want, they just kind of want to blend in and not grab attention. I'm all for attention. And a lot of our elders, a lot of our members are going back and fighting the establishment, saying, no, I want Native American on my birth certificate. No, I want Native American on my marriage license. And, sometimes it's, you go to the doctors and they put you down as other, or they put you what they think you are. I'm one of those girls that can pass for a lot of things. And so sometimes I'm white, sometimes I'm Hispanic. I'm never what I am. And so it's a constant task to go back and say, no, can you change this? I know it sounds probably trivial to them, but again, it's important to me because it's who I am. It's my ancestors. I do it for them. And I don't want them to be forgotten. I don't want to be forgotten. So my grandchildren aren't forgotten. So
I understand where you're going with that, Dana, because for so long, we could not say who we are, that it was almost become shameful for community members to say I'm Native because of such oppression that existed, because they did. So looking back after all the struggles, it is very important that we have made sure that our community, especially the youth, are very proud of where they come from. And we have worked very hard to bring awareness and to preserve our culture. And looking back at our ancestors, we just had a dialogue with at the Berkeley County Library in regards to our history, and it was very exciting to see the community come and say, hey, we want to know about your community. We want to understand what's going on and tell us your history. And to see people be accepting when at one time they were not accepting of that is really exciting now. And we're very proud to say that our ancestors stood up and said, we're Native American, we're Indians, and try and preserve that. So a lot of our communities do have cultural people who preserve the culture, who are trying to teach those arts and crafts and those traditions, to bring them back to the forefront. I want to make you laugh because we were trying to record some of our history and our culture, and they said, oh, that's great. And they were telling my mom about some of the things she used to do as a young girl growing up. And she says, well, I didn't think it was that. I thought we did it because we were just country and poor. And I said, well, no, Mom, that's part of your tradition and your culture. And, to us who live it every day, it's a way of life. And it's the way we grew up. And it's the way we related to those around us. And now we're looking back in hindsight and seeing, oh my goodness, this is us living a culture that most people don't get to see every day, or most people are not aware of. So bringing awareness is a huge thing, especially for the community around us. They need to know who we are, so that our children that go to school and they're in an environment with other people around them, they can say, oh, I know who you are. You are a Native from community that exists wherever. And I find you fascinating. I find you interesting. You have value. Everybody brings value to the table. And that's what we want to see, that our people are valued.
And one of the things I wanted to kind of clarify, because your question threw me off because you mentioned the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act was it was land allotment for land in Indian Territory, which was not in South Carolina.
Yeah, just the federal case. I was just citing the federal stuff. Yeah.
To that end, though, Pine Hill Indian Tribe was located at what is now Fort Jackson. And I think as far as the history of South Carolina goes, we are the only tribe that has been forcibly removed from our land. And it was to put Fort Jackson where it is today. When you have that kind of removal, we were stripped of everything. It was literally a hit the curb situation. So we were not, fortunate in that aspect that we had an option. We were told to go. So a lot of things got lost in because of that.
Well, the Catawbas were not forced, but they were strongly suggested that they move to North Carolina, up in that area. And they were promised 5 acres and a cow, not 40 acres and a mule, but 5 acres and a cow.
That's right.
Just how to farm. Well, North Carolina didn't agree to it. So we were nomads for a while. And the only reason that we have the 1 square mile, which is part of our federal tribe now, but it was a 1 square state reservation that we were put on in 1850 because we didn't have anywhere else to go because the land was gone. And as far as putting down who you are, we are indigenous and we became Native American after America was invented. So I suggest that if you put down Native American, also add your tribal name on there.
Right.
And you are not a member of a tribe, you are a citizen of a tribe, because you can be a member of a club.
That's right.
Yeah.
All of this is amazing. This conversation is so wonderful. Thank you so much for all of these incredible comments. Definitely speaking to erasure, not only of the past, but y'all are really helping, I think, our audience realize, right, you all are still here, right? You do, of course, have so much value. And thank you again for just being here and helping kind of teach our community members about that truth. Another form of erasure that is, of course, very present and contemporary, and not just an issue of the past, but definitely an issue of the past as well, is the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women. Many people probably don't know, but this is a particular type of femicide that is really not given the attention and resources needed. More than 4 out of 5 Indigenous women in the United States have experienced violence. 56% of Indigenous women experience sexual violence. Indigenous women are murdered 10 times more than any other ethnic group within the United States. And only 8% of these cases are ever even brought to court or prosecuted. And so I was just wondering if y'all could talk a little bit about why this is such a persistent problem and perhaps what is needed to address it.
Number one is that different tribes only have authority to bring charges against their own people. If a native comes onto their territory, they have no authority to charge them. Even if they charge them, they have to turn them over to the police that aren't part of the tribe or the reservation or whatever, because the laws have not changed to protect the women or anybody that's on Indian land.
And I think
That's-
from speaking from the state level, the laws for domestic violence and violence in general, they're not directed towards the victims. They don't actually help the victims. A number of times, if you were to have that talking circle, you would find that a lot of the times we just don't even bother to report it. Think back to an experience of your own where you were, let's say you were driving too fast, you got pulled over by the cop. I'm married to a retired police officer, so we've had this discussion many times. You walk up to the car and you say, give me your driver's license and your registration. And by the way, what is your race? That's not a question that gets asked, is it? But when they fill out the police report, they kind of do exactly what census takers have been known to have done. They base your race and put on your ticket what they think you are, or what comes back on your driver's license. Incidentally, race is not on the driver's license. And I think that part of the reason that violence among women, I think it's a lot higher than what we know because a lot of people don't report it. The criminal justice system also not designed to actually
protect the victim.
You have to really kind of invent your own way of protection when it comes to domestic violence and violence in general. I've also noticed that there is, and I don't think it's an intentional bias, but there's bias within both the law enforcement and legal circles, the judicial system, where you're kind of sized up by the way you look. I don't have the ability to pass as anything but this. I can't change this. So the experiences that I have had as a Native American woman in the Southeast and in the South, and this I think speaks to the missing and murdered Indigenous women's movement. We're kicked out of stores. I've been kicked out of stores because we don't serve Native Americans. We're still viewed in today's culture, I think the same as we were back at the beginning of the colonial history and even during the Trail of Tears and all of that. I mean, you're talking about women to it, and this is an observation. I'm not speaking from a scholar or academic level, but it seems to me that the European way is men are in charge of everything, where the Native way is women are in charge of everything. And I think I spoke when we met earlier in a separate discussion that as the chief of a tribe, I'm a chief, I'm a mother, I'm also a wife. So trying to balance that is hard to do because the man runs the house, right? How do you do that when the chief is also in the house? So it's an interesting thing. I mean, you have just in this circle, you have a lot of strong women And I think that if something was to happen to one of us, if one of us was to just fall off the face of the earth, we would start looking. I know we did with Lisa during the beginning of COVID. Where's Lisa? We would actually start looking for each other. But I do know that, for example, the Edisto, it wasn't a woman, it was a male that went missing. And unfortunately, I attended his funeral once his body was recovered. But I felt like that fell in that same venue, that particular case didn't seem to get the same attention as, for example, a non-native woman getting into a car that she thought was an Uber. And getting killed. We would not get that kind of attention. None of us would.
And unfortunately, a lot of the times whenever, especially if they are younger Indigenous women, they're treated as runaways.
That's right.
Instead of actually following up on the case to see what's really happened.
And all of the stereotypes seem to come into play. Native Americans are alcoholics, we're drunks, we're drug addicts, we're, all of the above. But then we're the Braves, and we're the Redskins, and we're the we're a sport team, or one of my things is I'm not a museum artifact. I'm an actual living human being. So there's a number of facets to trying to answer that question. It's kind of like really like which way do you want to go with that? Which way do you want to come from to answer that question?
I believe some of the issues, because Native women are targeted, is because Native people are pretty much invisible. There's not a lot of platform where the dominant society knows what's going on in Native communities and on reservations. So we are pretty much invisible to mainstream society. So there's a long legacy of hatred, long legacy of where we are not even considered a people, imperialism, all that's existed to shape what mainstream society thinks about Native people. And so women have always been thought to be a very vulnerable population, misunderstood, because mainstream society has designated the male figure as the person of authority, the person of respect, the person that people are supposed to speak to, get advice from. And it's very different from our Native communities, in which, as we have said before, the female role is the more acknowledged role in the community that supports the community as a whole. So it's very hard when we lose our women, when we lose our youth and children, because it hits us deep, in a deeper way. And it's a huge violation. So I think, how do we address it? How do we correct that? I think there's been a lot of movement where we are making sure everyone understands that this is a problem. We have so many different things going on, not just in the United States, but in Canada as well, where they're bringing to the problem, and so that people are aware that we have this happening in our communities and for our people. So the database that we had talked about before, trying to make sure that we're acknowledging who it is that are missing. We've never had anything where we can catalog what's going on. Who are we missing in our communities? You know, we got all the issues of sex trafficking and these things going on and as a national issue. But again, jurisdiction is a big thing because a lot of times governments won't step in when, especially on a federal level, when it's happening on Indian lands, you know, and with non-native people. So I think public awareness is the only way we're going to have any type of recourse to address these issues.
And it's a very deeply rooted, historically, it's deeply rooted all the way back to Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus, you know, I believe he wrote that, you know, the natives are so stupid, they'd be great slaves. You know, then colonized South Carolina. In the colonial records, you immediately see where the Lord Proprietors representatives, when they interacted with Native American tribes, they wanted to speak to the king or the emperor or the, you know, they gave us these weird names that didn't exist before. They immediately started to Europeanize us. And when you look through the colonial records, there's very little about women. The one thing that stands out, though, is when you do look at it, if you really carefully look at it, the men would say, we got to go ask the women. And so it was immediate, even in the colonial records, it was immediate that the men went to the women for instruction. So the matriarchal system was definitely in play. But bringing that forward, Native Americans are viewed in such a poor way. We're stereotyped. We're boxed in. You know, we have agencies and organizations and you know, people who mean well, that we want to come and help you, and we want to help the Native Americans, and they have best intentions, but what they don't realize they're doing, or what I've noticed, is that first we want to define what the Native American is so we can fix it.
We're not broke.
That's right. We're not broke. So they want to come in and define what we are and what we should be, and then fix that. Because the problem isn't the generational poverty or the intergenerational poverty or systematic poverty. The problem is not that poverty is a business. The problem is that you're an Indian, and we need to fix that problem. And we still run into that today.
I had to steal this comment from somebody because I don't remember who said it, but it's the fact that if we're not dressed in leather and feathers, we can't be an Indian. You know, they want to keep us in the past. They don't want to recognize us that we're viable, important people in the present.
And I'm sure, Dana, I know you wanted to, you jumped in, you were going to say something, but Becky made me think.
That's okay. No worries.
Becky's favorite thing. How what?
No. For I think part of the speaking from personal experience through family members who have had spousal abuse and abuse of different kinds, I find that a lot of them are just, regardless of their ethnicity, are already because they're a woman, afraid to go against the man, whether it's their husband, an uncle, or whoever. And then as for Native women, you've got what the other societies or feel about you, and then you put that weight on top of you. For us here, we try to make sure that there's always education. They know that there can come to the council, to other women, especially with the elders. Our female elders are very close knit, like a blanket. Even though they may be here, there, or everywhere, there is this invisible binding around all of us. And so if I'm afraid, if something happens and I'm afraid to go to the authorities, I would go to my aunt or one of my other elders, because one, I'm going to be safe. And then two, we get together and support the victim and help her have the strength to move forward and to seek help against this. I just, that's a very touchy one for me. So I just feel that education at this particular point in time, with a lot of folks meeting people online, not knowing who they are, and anything can happen. Unfortunately, we'd like to think that folks don't look at us and say, I'm going to do this or that, and yet they do. We still have to be aware. We still have to protect ourselves and understand that, unfortunately, society has its ugliness, and it's our job to make sure that they have support and can have someone to go to.
I agree with Dana. I think as far as missing murdered Indigenous women in South Carolina, the first issue is women. Law enforcement, my experience with law enforcement, having finally escaped a very bad marriage, they think women are hysterical. They think that, you must have done something to start it. You're not the victim you're trying to say you are. And you really have to kind of outsmart law enforcement to get where you need to go. To get out.
Oh, these are such complicated issues, and it just feels like an hour and even if it was 3 hours would not be enough to cover them. We do have a lot of questions that are coming in from folks, which is exciting. I wanted to ask a question that kind of brings together a couple of these questions, and that is, clearly, as you've been talking, and as is evidenced by your all's experience on this panel, women have always been in leadership and decision-making roles in Native cultures and societies. So this is a two-part question. Answer both or one. What are the unique realities that women navigate today in these leadership positions, particularly those of you in those positions right now? And then how have you found the strength to speak your voice after being so intentionally silenced for so long?
Well, I think that if I understood the question, as a female tribal leader, there's always a lot of pushback because we would rather talk to the man in the room. That's always a big thing. And the way that I handle it is no, that's that's not how we roll. And the unique reality is that women are just like with the domestic violence issue, we're just not capable of making decisions. We need a man to help us make a decision. And I think every woman that's on this this talking circle is going to tell you that's absolutely not true. I don't need anybody to help me make a decision at all.
We're too emotional to make vivid,
Right,
valid decisions, you know.
I think what I guess strengthens us is our families and community. They're the ones we're doing this for. When I think about the outreach we do, I think about how I honor my grandmother. I honor my ancestors. I'm keeping their hard work moving forward. So the strength we get is usually from the support system of our family, our community, and those Native people that stand with us, because we need to support one another. We need to stand together to move us all along. The Native American voice is a small voice in this state. We don't have the numbers that other minority cultures do. So we have learned how to get the attention and speak loudly sometimes so that we could be heard. We do want I guess one of the unique things, even though we don't as respected as we would like to be when we're at the table with others, we come knowing that we have to do something that most groups don't have to do. We have to do, as a good friend of mine used to say, Indian 101. Every time we sit at a table, we have to explain why we're sitting there and why our situation is a little bit more unique than other situations. And as a female sitting there doing that, there's a lot of people that seem to think they know what I want before I even open my mouth. And I'm like, no, that's not why I'm sitting here. Actually, I'm here for this, and this reason. So I always am very surprised when I should not be, about how many people like to mansplain or tell me what it is that I already know and tell me that, did you know that so yes, I do, because I live it every day. But do you know that we okay with that? We're here for this reason. So we do have a unique viewpoint, a unique perspective, and our perspective has value, and no one seems to understand that. So the support of those people in our community, the support of those family members that say thank you, and they get so excited when there is such positivity and movement, and they're like, thank you. You know, it's that thank you, because you're not going to hear the voice of just everyone in the community. And it's a hard burden sometimes to be the voice of a community, the voice of the people that you represent. And then like, oh, it's just Lisa. No, it's not just Lisa. Lisa's here in the shoes of everybody else that's in the community that she represents. And I think they don't see that.
I think another unique reality that we face as Native Americans is we're the only race that has to prove who we are to everybody every day. And we also have the unique fake Indian problem. So we run into, are you really who you say you are? So people assume that we walk around with our genealogy in our purse so that we can whip it out and prove, just for that not to be good enough.
Not really.
Yeah. So it's it's frustrating, and it's not. I don't think that's that's a woman issue. I think it's all tribal leaders, all Native American people in South Carolina. It's are you really an Indian? Who are you related to? You have to seem to have to be tied back to some major figure or major event to be valid. Then you have the issue of the state and state recognition process, which doesn't make you an Indian. It just says that you crossed off some boxes, you check the boxes, and you got through a process. You do the same thing to get a driver's license. Doesn't mean anything. There's also the issue of tribal groups or communities or whatever stealing. I've heard of that, stealing histories from another group. And then within the Native American communities, there's a whole new set of problems there. Power struggles, who's the chief, who's not the chief. I want to be the chief. That I witness a lot. So the realities that we face is a lot of it, I think, is brought on because mainstream society seems to demand that one, there needs to be a person in charge, and it should probably be a man. But that is not even our way. It's never been our way.
We're close to out of time, and I have so many questions, and we had additional questions. Maybe we could do one or two more, just very, very briefly. One question that has come through in a variety of different ways is how those of us who are non-Native can support your efforts moving forward. And in particular, there was a question about the preservation of language and reclaiming the language, and whether that is something that folks, for example, at the College of Charleston might be able to help with locally, or is that something that that non-Native folks should not play a role in? So essentially, what sorts of supports and amplification and visibility is helpful? Because you've talked a little bit about what is not helpful.
Send us your money.
And, I was trying to think of an eloquent way to say that, but yeah.
No, straight to the point. We straight to the point.
Straight to the point.
And it's not just us. I mean, yes, we have a committee, and yes, we did get some money to help us with it, but it's so restrictive. Of any federal money you get is so restricted to what you can do with it. I'll give you an example. When we got our federal recognition back in '93, because we were part of Eisenhower's doing away with smaller federal tribes, that when we got it back, we were able to get funding, which was nothing compared to what, if you went by how much the land was worth, we got pennies on the dollar for it. But with the Cultural Center was thriving, we had 21 full-time employees. We could do a lot of outreaches to schools, churches, clubs, and everything else. And then 7 years later, the BIA looks at our audits and says, oh, wait a minute, you can't use your 638 grant money to keep your culture going. So they sued the tribe for 7 years worth of cultural salaries. Mm. So we had to pay him back more than we got in the settlement. Mm. So that put a screeching halt to the Cultural Center. And then COVID came along and we were trying to get our feet back on the ground. So it's, and I'm quite sure that the other tribes within the state are facing the same thing without those restrictions. They can do technically more than we can because of the restrictions the federal government even puts on the federal tribes. So in a way, it's a curse. It's not a blessing.
Yeah, I think on the state level that at the state level, state recognized and the non-recognized tribes, we can't, we don't qualify for federal funding. Federal funds are for federal Indians is basically the rule of thumb. So we have to depend on independent foundations, things like that, donations. Pine Hill Indian Tribe's nonprofit arm is the Pine Hill Indian Community Development Initiative, and through that we run several affiliate programs. One is the Health Network, one is a food distribution, food security, things like that. So we are able to take donations as a nonprofit charity, and a lot of the tribes do have nonprofit status.
I think in our community, what we really would love help with, sometimes we have the opportunities to write for grants and try and bring these resources to the community, but we may not have the resources to have the help to write these grants. So people who are in positions where they have the skills to help write grants or do research, or they come in and help the tribal leadership to make a way of bringing these resources in, it's a great help because we can't afford to pay for it. So anytime someone wants to volunteer and come in a community that possess these skills, we are more than welcome to ask. We've been begging at this the state level with the Commission for Minority Affairs to help write grants to bring these resources into our different communities to help out with healthcare or language preservation, socioeconomic development, all the things that all the communities have issues with. You know, those are the things that are invaluable to us.
Right. I think for me, I think the main thing I would say is adopt a tribe or two, meaning come in and get to know us, see what we're about as a group of people. And from there, we can go on and have those conversations with each other. And, you know, definitely we would share what kind of opportunities we're looking for to make our community and our members' lives a little more easier. Definitely grant writing. I'm all for anyone who wants to come and help, but I'm also willing to learn, or at least, you know, show some of us some of the tips and tricks, and you know, because I've tried to research it myself and it's overwhelming, and I'm just like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and anything I do for the betterment of my people. But I think to start it all off, I think just like I said, adopting a tribe, send your colleagues, your students, whoever, and just come to get to know us. Come to a powwow, come to a language class, come to a dance class, come to a craft class, and get to know us. That would start a lot of things for us.
Thank you so much. So I want to just summarize here for folks listening. One thing that I heard was transform good intentions into material resources. And that's incredibly good advice. And also in the spirit of this conversation, just you know, approach these issues with humility and with a willingness to learn. And with that, I want to echo what I started with, which has deepened in the last hour and a half, and that is my gratitude to each of you for being here, for your generosity, for your vulnerability in this conversation. There's some deep learning that has occurred. Again, just a reminder that the Dyani White Hawk exhibit closes on the 26th on Saturday, and that the artist herself will be here on Friday the 25th from 5 to 7 in the galleries. And hopefully, if you have not had an opportunity to engage with the exhibition and you are close to or in Charleston, you will visit and you will see Becky Garris on one of the videos speaking, and they're just beautiful, the videos and the installation of the photography. I also am compelled to remind you that our next WGS at the Halsey event will be with Kukuli Velarde and Nancy Freeman Sanchez, and that will be this summer. So stay tuned for details on that. And I'm sorry to those of you who posed questions in the chat that we weren't able to get to, but hopefully you learned a lot and your questions were answered indirectly. Thank you to my colleagues, Annette and Brennan, and to Brian, who's in the background doing all the technical work, and to Mark Long for the opportunity to host this. Good night, everyone. And
good night, and I'll see you Tuesday.
See you
Thank
Tuesday.
you.
Becky.
Good night. Thank you.